The ship called the Dusty Hound moved slowly through the floating garbage of space. Broken ships, twisted metal, and forgotten machines drifted past the windows like silent ghosts. Danny Cole stood at the controls, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. He was 34 years old, with rough hands and tired eyes that had seen too many long nights in the empty void between stars. Behind him, the rest of his small crew worked quietly. They were salvage hunters, people who made their living by finding value in things others threw away. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept them flying. "Danny, you need to see this," said a voice through the ship's speakers. It was Marsh, his chief engineer. She was down in the engine room, but her sensors reached far beyond their little ship. Danny pressed a button on his console. "What do you have?" "There's a ship out there, sitting alone. It's not in the main scrap pile. Looks like they just parked it and walked away." Danny turned the Dusty Hound toward the signal. As they got closer, he saw what it meant. Most of the junk on this moon was torn apart and mixed together. But this ship sat by itself on a flat stretch of gray rock, almost like it was waiting for someone. The ship was old. He could tell that even from a distance. Its hull was scratched and dented from years of use, but it was whole. Nobody had cut it apart for parts yet. They landed at the processing station nearby. It was a cold, ugly place made of gray metal and harsh lights. The who ran it did not like humans very much. They thought humans were simple creatures, good for heavy labor but not much else. A tall official walked out to meet them. His scales were dark green, and his yellow eyes looked at Danny with obvious boredom. His name was Commander, and he was in charge of this scrapyard moon. "More human scavengers," said. His voice was flat and unfriendly. "What do you want?" Danny pointed toward the lonely ship in the distance. "That vessel over there, the one sitting by itself, what's its story?" Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That worthless thing, it is called the Sorrow of, named after the fool who used to command it. The power core failed 3 years ago. Our engineers looked at it and said it cannot be fixed. The design is too old. The parts do not exist anymore." "What happened to the captain?" Danny asked. Pointed a clawed finger toward a small shelter at the edge of the scrapyard. It looked more like a storage container than a home. "She lives there now. She refused to leave when we told her the ship was dead. So she stays here, watching it rust. A fitting end for someone who could not accept the truth." Danny looked at the shelter, then back at the ship. Something about the situation bothered him. He thanked and walked toward the small building, leaving his crew to handle the official paperwork. The shelter door was open. Inside, he saw an old female sitting on a simple chair. Her scales had lost their color, faded to a dull gray-brown. Her eyes, once probably sharp and commanding, now looked tired and empty. She noticed him standing there and spoke without looking up. "Come to laugh at the old captain. Everyone else does." Danny stepped inside and sat down on a crate across from her. "No, ma'am. I came to ask about your ship." For a moment the old captain said nothing. Then she turned to look at him, studying his face with sudden interest. "You are human. Why would a human care about a warship?" "Because I work in salvage," Danny said. "And that ship out there does not look like garbage to me." The captain's name was. She had commanded the ship for 40 years before the core failure. In that time she had fought in 12 major battles and traveled to corners of the galaxy that most beings would never see. Her crew had been like family. When the ship died, they were reassigned to other vessels, but had nothing else. The ship was her whole life. When the Empire declared the vessel beyond repair, they also took away her rank. She was not a commander anymore. She was just an old female with no purpose, living in a box next to her broken dream. Arrived while was talking. She listened quietly, then started asking questions about the ship systems. What kind of power core did it use? How were the backup systems connected? What happened exactly when the core failed? Answered every question without hesitation. Her memory was perfect. She knew every wire, every panel, every strange noise her ship made when the engines were running. Looked at Danny with that expression he knew well. It meant she had found something. The method is to replace whole systems when they break, said. They do not fix individual parts. When this ship got too old, they could not find replacement systems anymore, so they gave up. Danny nodded. He understood where this was going. But humans do not work that way, continued. We fix things piece by piece. We improvise. We find new uses for old parts. I think I can get this ship running again. Stared at her. For the first time in years, something like hope flickered in her old eyes, but she pushed it down quickly, afraid to believe. Impossible, she said. Our best engineers tried. They said the damage was too deep. Smiled. Your engineers never worked on a farm tractor that was older than their grandparents. Trust me, I have fixed worse. Danny stood up and offered his hand too. We would like to buy your ship, not for scrap. We want to bring it back to life. Looked at his hand for a long moment. She did not understand these strange humans. They saw something in her broken ship that her own people could not see. It made no sense. But she had nothing left to lose. She took his hand. Commander thought the whole thing was very funny. When Danny came to him with the offer to buy the Sorrow, the official laughed so hard that he had to hold onto his desk for support. You want to buy that dead thing? Asked, still chuckling. Why? Are you going to use it as a house? Perhaps a very large paperweight? Danny kept his face calm. How much do you want for it? Wiped his eyes with a clawed hand. He was enjoying this moment greatly. I will sell it to you for 100 credits. That is less than the cost of the metal it is made from. Consider it a gift for giving me the best laugh I have had in months. Danny paid the credits without argument, handed over the ownership papers, still grinning. He was certain that the humans would give up within a few days and fly away with their tails between their legs. It would be a nice story to tell at the next officer gathering. Gathered the crew and led them toward the Sorrow. The ship was bigger up close, a proper warship built for serious combat. Its hull was covered in old battle scars, marks from laser fire and collisions that had been patched over the years. The name was painted on the side in letters, faded but still readable. They entered through the main airlock. The inside was dark and cold, with no power running to any of the systems. Turned on her flashlight and led the way deeper into the vessel. The ship smelled old. Not rotten, just old. Like a book that had been sitting on a shelf for too many years. The walls were covered in dust and the floors creaked under their boots. But the structure was solid. They built their ships to last, and this one had been constructed in an era when quality mattered more than speed. Found the engine room at the heart of the ship. The power core sat in the center, a large cylinder covered in warning signs and control panels. When she opened the main access hatch, she saw the damage immediately. Burned circuits, melted wires, and cracked components filled the interior. This is bad, said Hank, one of the crew members. He was a big man with a thick beard, good with heavy lifting but not very technical. This is fixable, corrected him. She was already pulling out her toolkit. The engineers had looked at the power core and seen a disaster. They saw systems that needed complete replacement, parts that were no longer manufactured, and technology that was outdated by decades. To them, the only solution was to throw everything away and start fresh. But they could not do that with parts that did not exist anymore. Saw the same damage, but her mind worked differently. She did not see systems that needed replacing. She saw individual components that could be repaired, bypassed, or substituted. Where they saw a dead end, she saw a puzzle. She started with the burned circuits. Instead of replacing the whole board, she carefully removed the damaged sections and connected the working parts directly. It was not elegant, but it worked. They would have been horrified by such a crude solution, just smiled and moved on to the next problem. Danny worked beside her, holding lights and handing her tools. He did not have her technical skills, but he was patient and willing to learn. The other crew members helped where they could, carrying heavy parts and cleaning away years of dust and grime. Appeared at the door of the engine room on the second day. She stood there for a long time, just watching. Her old eyes moved across the familiar surfaces, remembering better times. "You are actually trying," she said quietly. It was not a question. Looked up from her work. Her face was covered in grease and her hair was tied back in a messy knot. "Yes, ma'am, and I think we are going to succeed." Stepped closer. She looked at what had done to the circuits and her eyes went wide. "That is not how it is supposed to be connected." "I know," said, "but it will work anyway." The old captain was silent for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a small laugh, rusty from years of disuse, but it was real. "You humans are insane," she said. "Absolutely insane." But she stayed, and she started to help. Knew the ship better than anyone alive. She knew which systems were connected to which, where the hidden access panels were, and what shortcuts the original builders had left behind. She guided through the maze of old technology, explaining things that would have taken weeks to figure out alone. Days passed. The work was slow and difficult. Sometimes they hit problems that seemed impossible to solve. The parts were designed to work only with other parts, and the humans had very few of those. Started making her own parts. Using the small machine shop on the Dusty Hound, she manufactured replacement components from raw materials. They were not pretty, but they fit the specifications exactly. She had learned this skill growing up on a poor colony world where you could not just order new parts from a catalog. If something broke, you made a new one yourself or you went without. The rest of the scrapyard started to notice what was happening. Workers would walk past the sorrow of and see lights flickering in the windows. They heard the sounds of tools and voices echoing from inside. Most of them laughed and made jokes about the crazy humans wasting their time. But some of them stopped laughing. Some of them started to watch with curiosity instead. On the 15th day, called everyone to the engine room. She had finished the last connection. The power core was as ready as it would ever be. "This is the moment of truth," she said. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "Either it works or we start over." Danny looked at. The old captain's eyes were fixed on the power core, her whole body tense with hope and fear. "Do it," she whispered. "Press the activation switch." For a long second, nothing happened. Then a deep hum began to rise from the core, growing louder and stronger. Lights flickered on across the engine room. Monitors blinked to life, showing system after system coming online. The sorrow of was waking up. The news spread through the scrapyard like fire through dry grass. The dead ship was alive again. The humans had done something that engineers said was impossible. Commander refused to believe it at first. He sat in his office, listening to the reports from his workers, and told them they were wrong. The power core of that ship was destroyed. No amount of human tinkering could change that simple fact. But the reports kept coming. The lights were on. The engines were warming up. Sounds of life echoed from a vessel that had been silent for 3 years. Finally, left his office and walked to the sorrow of himself. He needed to see this impossibility with his own eyes. What he found made him stop in his tracks. The ship was glowing with power. Its running lights shone against the gray landscape of the moon. Through the windows, he could see figures moving around inside, working on various systems. And standing at the base of the loading ramp was the old captain herself, looking stronger than she had in years. "What is this?" demanded. His voice was not amused anymore, it was angry. Danny walked down the ramp to meet him. "It is exactly what it looks like, Commander. The ship works now." "Impossible," shook his head. "Our engineers examined every system. The damage was beyond repair. You cannot fix something that is broken at its core." "We did not fix it," said, appearing behind Danny. She was still covered in grease, but her smile was bright and proud. We worked around it. We bypassed the broken parts and made the good parts work harder. Your engineers wanted to replace everything. We just convinced everything to cooperate. Stared at her. He did not understand what she was saying. The approach to technology was clean and logical. When something broke, you removed it and installed a new one. The idea of making broken things work together was strange to him, almost disturbing. "This is not proper engineering," he said. "This is trickery." "This is survival," Danny replied calmly. "Where we come from, you do not have the luxury of throwing things away. You make them work because you have no other choice. That is the human way." Looked at the ship again. He wanted to find something wrong with it, some proof that the humans had failed. But the sorrow of hummed with steady power, its systems running smoothly for the first time in 3 years. "It will fail," he said finally. "Within days the whole thing will collapse. Your crude repairs cannot hold." Danny shrugged. "Maybe, but it is flying again. That is more than your engineers could do." For a moment looked like he wanted to say something more, but instead he turned and walked away, his tail stiff with anger. He had been made to look foolish, and he would not forget it. Inside the ship, the crew continued their work. The power core was running, but there was still much to do. Life support systems needed calibration. Navigation computers needed updates. The weapons systems were offline, and nobody was sure if they could be restored without proper parts. Took charge of the interior work. She moved through the corridors like she was waking up from a long dream, touching walls and panels that she knew by heart. The crew followed her lead, trusting her knowledge of the ship's layout. "This deck was where my crew slept," she said as they walked through an empty hallway. 42 officers and soldiers. We spent more time here than in our own homes." Danny listened quietly. He could hear the sadness in her voice, but also the pride. This ship had meant everything to her. "What happened to them?" he asked, "after the core failed?" Was silent for a moment. "They were reassigned. The younger ones went to new ships. The older ones retired. I do not know where most of them are now. We were scattered like dust in the wind." She stopped at a door marked with symbols. "This was my cabin." The door was stuck, so Hank forced it open with a crowbar. Inside, the small room was dusty but preserved. A bed, a desk, and a shelf of personal items sat exactly where they had been left 3 years ago. Stepped inside slowly. She picked up a small metal box from the shelf and held it carefully in her clawed hands. "What is that?" asked. "Medals," said. "Awards for service. They gave me many of these over the years." She opened the box and looked at the pieces of metal inside. "They mean nothing now, just bits of shiny trash." Danny shook his head. "No, they mean that you served well. They mean that you earned respect. The fact that others forgot does not erase what you did." Looked at him with those tired old eyes. For so long she had believed that she was worthless, thrown away like her ship. But this human, this strange creature from a species that her people looked down upon, was telling her that she still mattered. "Why did you do this?" she asked. "Why did you help me? There was no profit in it. You could have taken easier salvage and left." Danny thought about the question. He had been asking himself the same thing. "Because I have seen too many good things go to waste," he said finally. "Ships, people, dreams. Everyone is so quick to give up when things get hard, but giving up means losing forever. Fighting means there is always a chance." Nodded, "And besides, we like a challenge. Nothing feels better than proving the experts wrong." Looked around her old cabin, then back at the humans who had given her hope again. She did not have words for what she was feeling, but for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel empty. Outside, the engines of the Sorrow have continued to hum. The ship was ready to fly again, and somewhere in the scrapyard, Commander was already writing a report to his superiors, trying to explain how a group of primitive humans had done the impossible. He had no idea that this was only the beginning. The day of the test flight arrived. The crew had spent 2 more weeks checking every system, testing every connection, and making sure the Sorrow of was ready to leave the ground. Now there was nothing left to do but try. Sat in the captain's chair for the first time in 3 years. Her claws rested on the armrests that had been worn smooth by decades of use. The bridge around her was alive with light and sound, monitors displaying information, speakers humming with the quiet music of a working ship. Sat at the engineering station, watching her readings carefully. Danny stood beside, ready to help if needed. The rest of the crew was spread throughout the ship, each one at a station that had been empty for far too long. "All systems are green," reported. "Power is stable. Life support is working. Navigation is online. We are ready when you are, Captain." Captain, it had been so long since anyone called that word. She felt something stir in her chest, an old feeling she had forgotten. Pride. "Begin launch sequence," she said. Her voice was steady and strong, the voice of a commander. The engines roared to life. The ship shook slightly as it lifted off the gray surface of the moon. Dust flew everywhere, creating a cloud that could be seen from the processing station. Inside the station, workers stopped what they were doing and stared out the windows. The Sorrow of rose into the dark sky, climbing higher and higher until it cleared the debris field that surrounded the moon. For the first time in 3 years, the old warship was flying. Danny looked out the main window at the stars ahead. He had seen this view thousands of times before, but it never got old. There was something pure about space, something that made all the troubles of the ground seem small and far away. "How does she feel?" he asked. The old captain closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of her ship. She could hear the rhythm of the engines, the hum of the power systems, the whisper of air flowing through the vents. They were different from before, slightly rougher and less polished, but they were alive. "She feels like home," said quietly. They flew for 3 hours, testing every system they could. The weapons were still offline, as had predicted, but everything else worked. The ship could travel through normal space and hyperspace. It could support a crew of 50. It could fight if it had to, once the guns were fixed. When they returned to the scrapyard, a crowd had gathered. Workers stood in groups, watching the ship descend with expressions of disbelief. Some of them had worked on the Sorrow of back when it was first condemned. They had told their supervisors it was finished. Now they were seeing proof that they had been wrong. Commander was waiting at the landing pad. His face was a mask of cold anger. "You got lucky," he said as Danny walked down the ramp. "One successful flight means nothing. The repairs will fail. The ship will break again. And next time there will be no saving it." Danny did not argue. There was no point. Had already made up his mind, and no amount of evidence would change it. Some people could not accept being wrong. But something interesting happened in the days that followed. Workers started approaching the humans with questions. They wanted to know how had fixed the power core. They wanted to understand the techniques she had used. They were curious about the human way of doing things. Answered their questions patiently. She showed them how to bypass damaged systems, how to make replacement parts from raw materials, and how to think creatively when the normal solutions would not work. Some of the workers listened politely and walked away, but others stayed, asking more questions, taking notes, genuinely interested. "You are changing things," observed one evening. She and Danny were sitting on the loading ramp, watching the stars come out. "My people have done things the same way for centuries. You are making them think differently." Danny shrugged. "We are just sharing what we know. Whether they use it or not is up to them." Was quiet for a moment. "I spent my whole life following rules. Do this, do that, follow the proper procedures. When something could not be done the proper way, I accepted that it could not be done at all. I never questioned it." She turned to look at Danny. "You humans question everything. You refuse to accept that something is impossible. It is a strange way to live, but I am starting to see the value in it. The days turned into weeks. The Sorrow became a regular sight in the skis above the scrapyard, as the crew took it out for practice flights and system tests. Each flight revealed new problems that needed fixing, but handled each one with the same calm creativity that had saved the ship in the first place. The humans were becoming famous, though they did not realize it yet. Stories about the restored ship were spreading beyond the scrapyard, carried by supply ships and traders to other parts of space. People talked about the primitive humans who had fixed an unfixable vessel, who had seen value where everyone else saw trash. One evening, a message arrived for Danny. It came from a noble, a wealthy merchant who had heard the stories. He wanted to meet with the humans. He had a ship of his own that had been declared beyond repair. He was willing to pay very well for their help. Danny read the message and smiled. He had come to this moon looking for scrap metal. He was leaving with something much more valuable, a reputation. And their adventure was just beginning. The noble's name was Lord, and he arrived at the scrapyard in a transport ship that cost more than everything Danny had ever owned. His scales were bright blue, polished until they shone like gemstones, and he wore robes made of fabric that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. He stepped onto the dusty ground of the moon and looked around with obvious distaste. This was not the kind of place someone like him usually visited, but the stories had been too interesting to ignore. "You are the humans," he said when Danny approached him. It was not a question. "The ones who brought the dead ship back to life." Danny nodded. "We are, and you have a ship you would like us to look at." His expression shifted slightly. There was hope in his eyes, carefully hidden behind his noble mask. "My father's yacht. He passed away 2 years ago, and the ship died with him. A failure in the navigation systems that cascaded through the entire vessel. Our engineers said it would be easier to build a new ship than to repair it." "But you do not want a new ship," Danny guessed. "No." For a moment's mask slipped, and Danny saw real emotion underneath. "That yacht was my father's pride. He built it himself piece by piece over 30 years. It was not just a ship to him. It was his life's work. I cannot simply throw it away and replace it." Danny understood. He had seen the same look in his eyes when she talked about the sorrow of. Some things could not be measured in credits. "Show us the ship," Danny said. "We will see what we can do." The yacht was being stored at a private facility on a nearby moon. It was beautiful, even in its broken state. Sleek lines, elegant design, and craftsmanship that spoke of love and patience. This was not a ship built in a factory. It was a work of art. Spent 3 days examining the damage. The navigation failure had indeed spread throughout the ship, causing cascading problems in dozens of connected systems. The engineers were right that fixing it would be incredibly difficult. But difficult was not the same as impossible. "I can do it," told Danny on the 4th day. "It will take time, weeks, maybe months, and I will need help from people who know systems better than I do." Danny knew who she meant. He returned to the scrapyard and found in her cabin on the sorrow of reading reports about the ship's current status. "We have a job," he said, "a big one, and I would like you to be part of our team." Set down her reports. "You want me to help restore another ship?" "Yes, but more than that, I want you to be our partner. Full share of the profits, equal say in decisions. You know technology better than any of us. We need that knowledge." The old captain was silent for a long moment. She had spent 3 years believing her life was over. Now she was being offered a new beginning, a chance to use her skills and experience for something meaningful. "I am old," she said. "I am slow. I cannot work the long hours I used to work." Danny smiled. "You are wise, you are experienced, and you never give up on something you believe in. That is worth more than speed." Stood up, she looked around her cabin, at the medals she had earned and the memories she had gathered over a lifetime of service. Then she looked at Danny. "When do we start?" The restoration of Lord's yacht took 4 months. It was the hardest job any of them had ever done. There were moments when even doubted they could succeed. But they kept working, kept trying, kept refusing to give up. Proved invaluable. Her knowledge of engineering filled in the gaps that the humans could not cover. She taught them tricks and techniques that no human had ever learned before. In return, they taught her the human way of thinking, the creativity and stubbornness that had saved her own ship. They became a family of sorts, not by blood but by choice. Humans and working side by side, learning from each other, growing together. When the yacht finally flew again, Lord wept. He did not care that his servants were watching. His father's legacy was alive once more, and that was all that mattered. The payment he gave them was generous beyond anything Danny had expected, but more valuable than the credits was the reputation they had earned. Word spread across space about the human crew that could restore the dead. Soon, other nobles and merchants came calling, each with their own broken treasures. The Dusty Hound and the Sorrow have traveled together now, partners in a business that nobody had expected to succeed. Commander watched them leave the scrapyard for the last time, his face unreadable. "You know," said as they flew toward their next job, "my people called humans primitive. They said you were too simple to understand proper technology. They thought you would never amount to anything." Danny leaned back in his chair. "And what do you think now?" Smiled. It was strange how natural that expression felt now, after so many years of emptiness. "I think we were the primitive ones. We were so focused on doing things the right way that we forgot there might be other ways, better ways. You showed us that nothing is truly worthless if you are willing to work hard enough." Laughed from her station. "Just wait until we really get started. This is only the beginning." And she was right. The universe was full of broken things, abandoned dreams and forgotten treasures. Somewhere out there, they were waiting to be found and brought back to life. The humans would find them. They always did.